Hi, Misha here, and doing yet another fleet video. Looked at several now, both Federation and Alien. And in these I kind of like to arrange ships with a certain theme or pattern, which is just kind of how my mind works. Collecting sets, doing things in groupings. It's just kind of how I am. So in this one, we're going to look at the ships of Starfleet in the 22nd century. So pretty much all of these are from Enterprise, or right after that series. And I have to admit, most of these you see here are either the reason I got into the Eaglemoss collection or the reason I've stayed with it. Because these are all pretty unique. And when it comes time for my section where I rate them, it's going to be a tough one. Because really none of these have disappointed me. And I've roughly laid them out in chronological order. And to be fair, we really don't know much about these ships. And I've just laid out the Starfleet ships, not the freighters, not this time. I'll probably do a separate video on the evolution of freighters. But we're still waiting on a few freighters at the end of the collection. As it is now, we pretty much have all the Starfleet ships, though. So, with that said, we're going to start with one that I nearly didn't include, but I decided to kind of at the last minute for a couple of reasons. This is the Starfleet Transport. Specifically, this is a model of Arctic 1, as seen in the Borg episode Regeneration. But this is a class of ship. And the reason I decided to include it, because we do see these featured in a few other episodes. For example, more than one are in the Homecoming Fleet in the episode Stormfront. Also, we see them in the episode Demon. This is a scientific craft, kind of the great grandpappy of the Oberth. Small and well appointed for science. I say small, it's actually reasonable size. It's 50 meters. It can be operated with a small crew of about 4. But it can comfortably house up to 24 people, including room for laboratories, research, scientific studies. It is capable of warp, but a modest warp of 1.4, enough to get around the solar system, but not a whole lot else. It is not armed, but it does have hull polarization for defense. This is the model that has the skis, which is because it was used in the Arctic. We can assume that other places in the cold we might see it as well. But we also see this model in the series without the skis, meaning they're optional equipment. Again, most of its internal volume is made up by science labs and medical facilities and whatnot. But yeah, this seems to be a pretty common class in Starfleet. Used as a shuttle transport research vehicle. And some have suggested that these were used to investigate certain moons, like the moons of Jupiter or Saturn. I like that. I think that's a good idea. I even kind of think maybe this is the Neptune class that Tucker refers to. Absolutely no canon evidence for that, but it would kind of fit with what we know about the Neptune class. I don't know. I'm just having fun. But yeah, an early science vessel. Moving along, we have the most recent release, the Sarajevo class. This is defined as a Starfleet light observation vessel or transport. Others have likened it to a yacht. Again, we don't know much about it. We know that it has phasers and or plasma weaponry. Seems to be reasonably fast by Starfleet standards of the day. Probably warp 3 to warp 4. It's 200 meters long, so one of the largest on the table. And because of how thick it is, we know that it must have quite a few decks and quite a bit of deck space. So when used as a transport, it can probably carry quite a few people. We first see this one in that same homecoming fleet at the end of Stormfront, the opening two-parter of Season 4. And then we see this particular model, the SS, or maybe USS Sarajevo, NC-27. So it could be the NC class or something else. But yeah, it seems to be used as kind of a courier. It has an interesting shape to it. In a way, it does kind of harken similar to Arctic 1 and the kind of curviness. That's why I put them together on the table. It does have warp nacelles, but they're kind of tucked in, which leads me to think that these are maybe not the fastest engines, but maybe the most compact. You know, kind of a different direction, because just because Earth is unified doesn't mean that they're only going to try one system to get out into space. Could also be a colony ship or supply ship for colonies. Moving on, we have the first one that's in kind of the direct lineage to the NX. Now, this class does not have an official name. It's simply called the Warp Delta because of the, well, delta shape and the warp engines. Unofficially, kind of beta canon calls it the Ganges class, which I kind of prefer just to give it a name. We first see these in the final episode of Season 2, The Expanse, and then we see them quite a few times after that, including the very good episode Twilight, as well as, again, in that famous Homecoming fleet, and once or twice otherwise. This seems to be an older class by 2150, 152. It also seems to be based on an even earlier class, the Emmett type, which the old Emmett type had the same kind of delta shape and similar warp nacelles, but instead of more modern impulse engines like this one has, the Emmett still had old style chemical rocket cones. So this seems to be kind of a modernization or refit of that type. Probably has been in service a number of years, gone through a number of upgrades. Size-wise, it seems to be about 130 meters. Doesn't seem to have a very big crew, probably of around 30. It is not armed with torpedo launchers, but it does have phase cannons. Probably early on it also had plasma cannons, but were upgraded. Don't really know the max warp, but it was enough to be a decent interceptor. So probably at least after upgrades it's capable of at least warp 3. In Starfleet in the 2350s and into the Romulan Wars, this is kind of considered a frigate. And is used to kind of defend planets like, well, Earth and colonies. And what I think is neat about it, if you use your imagination, you can kind of see this Delta started off as more of something like a space shuttle. And the wings got extended in a warp. It just kind of flows well with our current design aesthetic to theirs. So this is pre-saucer. This would also be pre use of transporters for personnel, so it's going to have a pretty good sized shuttle bay. Probably explaining why it has a relatively modest crew. But leading on from there, we have the half-saucer type, as the production crew named it. We do see this one of these named on screen as the Intrepid, so many just consider it the Intrepid type, or Intrepid class even. This seems to be newer than the Warp Delta, the Ganges, but still older than the NX. Very large warp engines, or warp nacelles, excuse me. Has quite large impulse manifolds on the edge of the saucer. A very large shuttle bay in the rear. Again, this would be pre-hardcore use of the transporters, so very important. It's a little faster than the Warp Delta, probably approaching Warp 4, at least after refits. It also not only has phase cannons, but it has 2 spatial torpedo launchers. It's possible this could be upgraded to photonic torpedoes, but it may be too old. But it has some interesting design cues, the evolution. When you look at this half saucer, you really can see where they started with this shape and just rounded it off more and more, and then moved the nacelles to this extension. I just think it shows a very nice progression. These fins on the edge are said to be for cooling, which is actually a legitimate concern in space. Heat does not dissipate well in space without some assistance, so legit. This is a little bigger than the Ganges. It's about 165 meters. And it has a crew of 46 to 50. And this was considered a light cruiser. It was also one of Earth's first kind of long-range starships, deep space, for protecting colonies. These 2 were also used to protect the Sol system. And we're pretty much the immediate predecessor of the NX class, NX-01 Enterprise, which, as we know, was Earth's first Warp 5 capable ship, first launched in 2151. It's 225 meters long, has a standard crew of 82, but can carry more comfortably. We know from when the Makos were assigned on board, so it could carry at least 100 comfortably. It can reach a little past Warp 5, but really cruises at about 4.5. It's armed with 3 phase cannons, spatial, later photonic torpedoes, and ionized hull plating. This was the first of these to have a human live rated transporter, but it still had shuttle pods on board for routine use. And this was the first one designed for deep space exploration specifically. And this would be classified as a standard cruiser or heavy cruiser in terms of the Earth-Romulan War. Of course, the Enterprise would be first, Columbia would be second, and these would still be very much considered top of the line into the 2160s and the founding of the Federation. The reason the Enterprise itself was retired was because it was damaged in battle, but they were still making these after the end of the Federation. The beginning of the Federation. So that's all we have for strictly speaking canon ships. But the two final ones on the end are interesting. This is the Bonaventure. Now, in the animated series, 1973, there was a Bonaventure, but this is kind of the reimagining of that ship. It is meant to be a combination of the NX class and the later Constitution. Has a very Constitution-style deflector in front instead of the NX style. The nacelles are also very transitional. Has this very large hump in the middle of the saucer. This would be NX or NCC 1000. This would be one of Earth's first Warp 7 ships, serving in 2160s and beyond. And this is not in Eaglemoss's standard collection, this is in their bonus series. That's a cat behind me if you can't tell. Thank you, kitty. But I just couldn't help but include it, even though it's not strictly speaking canon. This next one is definitely more canon. And this was actually issue 100 in our collection. This is the quite famous, although rarely seen on screen, Daedalus class. Whereas the Bonaventure class kind of kept the NX class. This was an explorer, but also had good defensive capability. The Daedalus class was made after the formation of the Federation. It was also Warp 7 capable, and this was designed specifically for scientific missions and exploration, with not a whole lot of effort given for defense. Now, this was an advanced ship, but its advancements were more in the science realm than military. I think after the Romulan War, they were just sick of it. They wanted to go to exploration. It is definitely an odd look. It's also quite short. It's about 140 meters. But the weird thing is, most sources say it has a crew of 229. Now, thanks to the spherical hull and the big cylindrical hull in the back here, yes, they have more space, but that does seem rather crammed in there. But hey, it did have phase cannons and photonic torpedoes. And it was fast. It had very good sensors. And this class was made famous by ships such as the USS Essex, USS Horizon, and USS Archon. And these would serve throughout the latter part of the 22nd century, being retired in 2196. Their major fault was just that they just didn't have a great way to defend themselves. But they were good explorers. And these are said to be part of the golden age of Starfleet. So yeah, with that rundown in hand, even though I said I like them all, if I had to rank them, well, how would I? One ship you might have noticed is missing that would really fit in here is the USS Franklin from Star Trek Beyond. And while I actually like the design, it's in the special line, which means it's larger scale. I really wish they had done a standard-sized Franklin to go with these others, because as it is, it's just so much bigger. Such things kind of bug me. But I actually do like the design. Just thought I'd mention that in case someone was thinking it. Hadn't forgot. It just doesn't fit with these, unfortunately. But they do all the JJ verse ships in the XL, or the special line. So I have 7 here. Again, I like them all. But if I had to say my number 7 pick, I'm going to go with the Arctic one. For one, it's basically an overgrown Skimobile. And for another, they released this not long after they released the Borgified version. So while I'm happy they did it, it seemed a little redundant. But again, I'm not complaining. One thing I like is the main body is almost all metal, with really only the skis being polymer. It's a well done model. But yeah, I'm having to pick, so that'll be number 7. Number 6. It's already hard for me to pick because I really like these all. Number 6. As tough as it is, I'm going to say the Daedalus. There it is. And don't get me wrong, this is one that I was super excited when they did. I always thought it was a cool class of ship. In fact, when I was in school, in junior high and high school, we did a comedy series we wrote for an English assignment throughout the year, where I used one of these as kind of the fictitious setting for something, and yeah. The USS Deadfly is what it was called. But, so I like the Daedalus class, but, you know, being a spherical, it is an odd shape. It's intentionally meant to be clunky, and it pulls that off well. And one thing I'll say is, while it does have decent metal content, it's a relatively light model. The top part of the sphere and this back cylinder metal, but the bottom part of the sphere and of course the nacelles are plastic. So it does feel a little light. It's a good size though. And there are a few kind of paint app issues with a lot of these. Again, I'm not saying it's bad. I'm super glad they did it, but I kind of wish it was more metal. And it just doesn't really fit with the rest of the Starship series. Again, it's not Eaglemoss's fault. But there it is. Nonetheless. Moving on. This is when I almost would just say the rest of these are a tie. I guess I will say the Bonaventure. I love the kind of melding of the two designs. I really do. I think they did an excellent job. And there's actually quite a bit of metal content. The entire central part is metal, top and bottom, with really only the nacelles being the plastic. The only downside, since this was a bonus edition, it cost more. And the stand they shipped these with was kind of eh. In fact, some have said they thought they mixed this up with the Enterprise F stand. Maybe, I don't know. But, and mostly it's just because this was not a ship as seen on screen. It's a non-canon ship, only really seen in like the Ships of the Line and a few other places. So I think it fits in very well. It's essentially a made-up or speculative ship. Just how it is. So that'll be my number 5. For my number 4, I'm going to go with the Sarajevo. Now, this is one I really... Oops, one more over there. Here we go. This is one I really like, and I was super excited. I was waiting and waiting for them to come out with it, and I'm in no way disappointed. It's a very large size. It's metal, top and bottom, although it does have a lot of polymer on the bottom, too. It does have plastic inserts for the warp nacelles. And some people think it looks weird as a Federation ship. I don't. I think it looks different, but I think kind of the pointed hull and everything matches well with the Emmett and the Warp Delta. I think the only reason it's not higher is because it's not a terribly iconic ship. It's kind of almost a blink and you'll miss it. I mean, for me, that's all of them. But yeah, this is one I was definitely curious what it looked like, and it's neat. It's different. It's not a combat ship. It's something else. It's got a lot of metal content. It's pretty heavy, but it also has a decent amount of plastic, like the bridge area on top and part of the bottom. So yeah, it can be number 4. Number 3. I'm going to go with the Intrepid. Now this is one of my favorite Eaglemoss ships, period. So it's not that I don't like it, but I kind of have a little bit of an ugly duckling syndrome with it. I like it because it is so weird. The only part I don't really super care for in the design are the fins. They're a little pointless, but I love the kind of the huge overblown nacelles, the half saucer. It has a very cobbled together look. And this is seen pretty prominently throughout Enterprise. And I think its imbalance is part of its charm. The model itself, the saucer is metal. The giant warp nacelles are plastic, so it's pretty light, with most of the weight being in the front. Number 2 will be the Ganges, the Warp Delta. This was definitely one, along with its Emmett cousin, that I wanted. And it was actually about when this came out, I decided I just had to get into the Eaglemoss collection, despite everything. The top is plastic, where the bridge is at, and the bottom is metal. For how small and the show it is actually a good size. It's a very sleek ship. It's different, yet still very Federation, or I should say Starfleet, very Earth Starfleet. And I love these transitional steps. So you can tell that it's an aging ship in the fleet, but still valid. And surprisingly, number 1 is going to be the NX-01. Now, typically, I don't pick the standard ships. I tend to like the ships Eaglemoss does that are unique, that no one else has done. Which is why I generally like the 22nd Century collection. Most of these are hard to find models of. And the NX-01 is early in our collection, which can either be good or bad. The early ones are either just knock it out of the park or have some kind of error. But I mean, the NX-01 model is what all die-cast models should be. It's a good size, good detail level, and all metal. Top and bottom. Even running to the back on these small struts. The only plastic being essentially the warp nacelles. think even the pylons back here are metal. Even the bridge module is metal. And you can feel it. It's probably the heaviest one on the table. And I'm told that it has pretty neat paint too. The XL NX01 is one of the best XLs they've done too. And also there's the SS Enterprise refit, the Columbia refit class, in the special line like the Franklin, and it too is knocking it out of the park. They just do a really good job with all of the NX01 variations by Eaglemoss. They also do a good job with the shuttle pod from Enterprise. I had to give respect where respect was due, and even though I knew what the NX01 looked like, they just did too good of a job not to rank this as number one. I know a lot of people say it looks like the Akira. They're not wrong. It's different enough though that it doesn't bug me. Even if it does, so what? How many ships look like the Constitution class Enterprise, at least in the broad strokes? So that's okay. Yeah, but every single one of these I like. And you can really see the evolution of Starfleet. As I've said in other videos, say what you will about the writing and some of the plots in Enterprise, especially the first couple of seasons, but I think the CGI models and the variations, I think they really got that down right. And primarily that has a lot to do with John Eaves. So, again, credit where credit's due. So what do you think? Do you like these? I mean, do you hate them? I don't know, I tend to like the old Starfleets a lot. I even prefer the Cage Constitution Enterprise to the standard Constitution Enterprise. Not that I hate the original Connie from the main series, but I don't know, just kind of like the Cage one a little bit more. You know what I mean? Just it's mostly the nacelles that are different. Also the slightly larger bridge and everything. But I digress. Anyway, guys, hope you enjoyed this other fleet look at. Any questions or comments, please post them below. And always, if you could, please like, share, and subscribe. This is Misha, and I'll catch you very soon. Next time.